Well, good evening and welcome to our Friday night Bible study. Hopefully, this will get uploaded in time. We started recording a little bit late. I was experimenting with something because we used to use two microphones and all of a sudden they started causing echo. So I was trying to set a delay on one of them that would line them up so they wouldn't have that echo. And I couldn't find a setting that would get rid of it, so I wasted a whole bunch of time fiddling around with that. And then we had some other things we had to take care of. But here we are, and life progresses, and so it's another week and another chance for us to get together and study from the written word. Biggest news in this house this week was last weekend to be exact. We had planned to stream a sermon presentation live at 11 o'clock Central Time, which means usually at about 10:50 I start the stream and play music as poorly as I do that until it's time for the stream to begin. That way people can tune in and they know they're there, they can get linked up and they can join us essentially live. And so we were doing that, and uh, no sooner we get started than we weren't on. Our internet went out. Now, I know that I mentioned last week the problems they had last Friday with the CrowdStrike software and some Microsoft related things causing computer outages all over. And we even believe that we may have seen an effect of it in the Bible Gateway software that we use because it didn't have the little tabs which allowed you to move from one chapter to the next back and forth. I see they're there now. You can't see it yet because I haven't gone to that view, but they're there. So maybe that was the problem. But that wasn't it for us on Saturday, because I thought, well, I really would like to get online and put a note on the group so people will know why we're not there. So I got out my phone and I linked it up by data over the cellular network, which was something because we don't always get a good cell signal where we live here. But I was able to get one and get hooked up, got onto Facebook, and it said, "We don't know who you are. We need to confirm this is you. We've sent you a message on one of your other devices." Well, all my other devices are hooked up through our Wi-Fi on our internet connection, so they're not going to be on. I'm not going to be able to get it there. I tried, they had other ways. Well, the other way was to send me an email. Well, I forgot at the time. I do have my email set up on my phone. I might have been able to pull that off, but I was getting a little frustrated because the reason I'm trying to do this is because I'm off the internet on all other devices, and now you won't let me on this device. And in fact, when we did get on with all the other devices, they sent me a little crowing little message. Somebody tried to sign on your account, and we stopped them. Yeah, that was me. I wouldn't be proud about that, but yeah, I understand why they do it. I've had problems with people hacking into my account and signing in as me, making problems. So I understand why they do it, but it does get frustrating that we live in a world where we have to make life so hard for ourselves because there are people out there who have no self-control and are more than happy to destroy other people's happiness for their own perceived advantage. It's no advantage to them really, but they perceive it that way. So anyway, that was why it took us a long time to get the video posted. I went outside and looked at the wires and the phone poles and all sorts of things, trying to sort out if I could see any reason why our internet keeps going out, and couldn't find it. And we were kind of hoping it would come back up because usually when it does that, 5 or 10 minutes we're back up, we're okay. And it just wasn't coming back up, so we finally gave up. And about 15 after 11 we started recording, which means it was close to noon when we finished the recording, and then we still had to upload it. And I uploaded it twice. I don't know, the second time didn't take very long, so apparently Facebook was able to tell that I was uploading the same file, and they eventually got it up where we could see that it was there. So we apologize for the delay. If anybody was counting on it being there, all I can guess is somebody didn't want people to hear what we had to say. So I noticed as I booted up the computer here and got things going that they're having problems with a wildfire in California. So there's also there was news of an Arizona student who fell from cables on the Half Dome at Yosemite National Park and fell to her death. So bad things keep happening in this broken world, and that's why we look forward to a time when we can be rescued, not from this world, but from the brokenness of it. And that may involve spending a period of time, however long you might think that would be, away from this world while God gets it in shape for us to return and to live here in the way He designed us to live here to begin with. So,
us in shape to live here.
well, that's part of it. Yeah,
The world, us as well.
yeah. The world's in bad shape. We polluted it and messed with it, and so it's in pretty sad shape. But so are we. And if God is going to restore His approach to life on this planet the way He designed it to work, then He's got to fix us as well as the planet. You're right.
I'm remembering, and I have no idea where my mother came up with this, but she told me once when I was young that just before Jesus comes, our food supply is going to be poisoned, and a large amount of people would be sick and dying from our food supply. Well, I had never seen that in Ellen's writings, and I don't know where else my mother could have come up with that. However, I look at what we're dealing with now and see that there is truth to that.
And
At least I believe there to be truth to that.
it isn't poison per se. It's just a diet that's profitable for the big food companies.
Well, we have been conditioned to want unhealthy foods. I was listening during the night to a history of transplants, how human organ transplants.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it they told the story of a lady who received I forgot what, but she received a new organ. It might have been a kidney, a liver, whatever. After her surgery, she started craving beer and McNuggets. And it drove her nuts because she didn't like beer. She didn't drink beer. She didn't drink alcohol at all. And she didn't eat McNuggets. And she got to snooping and discovered that the person who had died and she received his organs was somebody that enjoyed beer and McNuggets. And the person who was telling the story was like, "This is creepy, this is weird. She's now to people, he's taken over her body." And well, no, this is just a case of those organs had been conditioned to being fed those unhealthy ingredients, and they were craving out to have those ingredients.
What they were used to.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a matter of conditioning. We gotta have it.
And we know that the food industry, as it develops its products focuses on what will gain them the greatest market share, what will convince you to buy more of that product. So they will tweak that product and tweak the ingredients to make it so that you want more. And so we live in an epidemic of overeating because the food industry makes money when we buy more and eat more. And so they tailor our food to make us want more. And then it kills us.
And when we eat differently than what we've been trained to eat, we live healthier. We don't experience the ailments that we do when we eat unhealthy.
Mm-hmm.
And I can attest that I was damaged by not only diet, but also prescribed medication that my body couldn't handle. Because of that, I ended up a diabetic, and my body can't handle the medication to help control that. I am forced to do it by diet alone. And I eat low carb, no sugar. And with that diet, I am able to maintain a healthy blood sugar level. I have actually I have reversed cataracts. I was needing cataract surgery, not anymore. I took ellagic acid, which is nothing more than ground up fruit seed of different kinds. I take muscadine grape, and I overcame what they believe was cancer.
Mm-hmm.
I had a, quote, very bad, unquote, PAP, and I had a visual diagnosis of cancer. I started taking the ellagic acid, and 2 months later, when I went in for the biopsy, my uterus was healthy.
Mm-hmm.
However, the problem was still there. So, what we're dealing with now is just back to what you were saying. Our world today, we're unhealthy, and a lot of it we've brought upon ourselves by our lifestyle. And God needs to retool our brain pathways to help us to not crave these things that we really don't need to be eating or doing or thinking.
Yeah, you got off on that, and I was about to say something else about the food industry, and that is how short-sighted their approach is. Because if you shorten the life of your customer, in the end, your customer buys less than they would if their life were lengthened. But they'd rather you buy more now than buy more over the long term. That's just the nature of our corporate governance system, and ultimately the nature of our broken condition as fallen humans. Anyway.
There is a doctor up in Canada who is putting out videos. His name is Jason Fung, Fung. Every one of his patients were dying. And it's not a case of him being a bad doctor. It's a case of what they were dying from. um, his patients were all on dialysis, and eventually they would die. And he decided he wanted to do something about it, so he started looking into it, and he put them on a ketogenic diet. And before patients went into renal failure, he was able to reverse their how do you say it? Reverse their renal disease. Once they went into full renal failure, I think he said he couldn't help them. But up until then, you know, they could be reversed with a change in diet.
Yeah. Well, our shy kitty is right over here behind the camera. The camera's in the laptop monitor lid. She's right behind it there. She has taken a sleeping there a lot, so she's there right now. I suppose the other cat's in there with you, isn't she?
No, maybe you better come close the door. Because if that one comes in here and walks on me, I'll be screaming.
All right, I'll come and pull the door too. Or do you want it shut completely?
Just shut the bedroom door.
Okay. Where did Mia go? Oh, there she
Oh,
is.
she is in here.
Okay, well, the not shy cat wasn't where she usually is, but when I went to close the door, she showed up in the bedroom real quick. So, I think it is time that we went ahead and got started on our study. So, let's bow our heads and have a word of prayer. Our Father in heaven, thank you for all your blessings to us. Thank you for your protection and watch care, for giving us another week. And we thank you that we have the written word designed to lead us to the true light. We understand that these are the words that testify about Jesus, and that if we want eternal life, we must come to Jesus. So as we open this word this evening, we ask that your Holy Spirit will draw close and help each person to find Jesus in what we read out of the written word. And we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. So, last week we looked at Exodus chapter 19 and the lead up to the presentation of the Ten Commandments. Now, everybody calls Exodus 20 the Ten Commandments, except for Exodus 20. Now, the Ten Commandments are listed elsewhere, and there are very clearly 10 commands here, so it makes sense to identify these as the Ten Commandments.
Except not everybody is doing that now.
Doing what?
Referring to them as the Ten Commandments.
Well,
There are people who are referring to them as the 10 promises.
well, yes, and we'll talk about the nature of these things. We did briefly talk last week, and I'd like to just review it again, about what was going on with all the fire and smoke and thunder and all the essentially shock and awe elements of this confrontation between God and his people. And what we concluded was that the presence of God the Father is fatal to sin and to anything that is inextricably linked to sin, like the average human. It's fatal to them as well. So God needed his people to understand that while he loved them, they had to keep their distance. We're going to run into more of that as we go on through the book of Exodus. Um, I don't think it was a case, as some people interpret it, that, well, God was going to make them afraid of him so that they'd know they better do what he says or else. Um, it sometimes reads kind of like that, particularly given our cultural bias in that direction, because, that's how we think, that's how we operate. If you're big and bad and frightful, people will do what you say. If you're weak, well, people will ignore you. Well, people ought to ignore you anyway. You shouldn't be trying to force people, but that's another discussion for another time, I guess. So in Exodus chapter 20, verse 1, it says, "Then the Lord gave the people all these instructions." And that's footnote A. Footnote A says all these words in the Hebrew. So God is spelling this out for them. And some scholars have noted that the Ten Commandments, while we usually begin them at verse 3, really begin at verse 2. And if you don't include verse 2, you don't fully understand what the Ten Commandments are all about. What does verse 2 say? "I am Yahweh, your Elohim, who rescued you from the land of Egypt, the place of your slavery."
So God is claiming credit for rescuing them rather than Moses.
Yes, he is. Furthermore, what is to follow is firmly based in this concept. Yahweh is their God, and he has given them a national identity by rescuing them from the land of their exploitation, bondage, and abuse. He set them free. If you think of the Ten Commandments as a list of rules to bind you and tie you down in how you live, then God has not rescued you and set you free, and in that case, the Ten Commandments don't apply.
You're focusing on your behavior.
Well, that's part of it. That's true, but you're also not recognizing your freedom as a child of God. Sounded like you were trying to say something.
If you're focusing on your behavior about the commandments, you mean I can't do that? You're going to be a little bit resentful if there's something there that you're wanting to do. If you're wanting to covet your neighbor's wife, all right, I heard of an Adventist pastor who told somebody that I know personally that it's okay to lust after other women. You can lust after any of them you want. As long as you don't act upon it, it's okay.
But that's not how the commandments read, do they?
That's not how the commandment reads. And science has now proven what happens when you do that. It has the same effect on your brain
As if
when
you
you
really were doing it.
as it would have if you were actually doing the deed.
Mm-hmm.
And they have proven that with PET scans,
Mm-hmm.
EEG scans. I heard about that. I looked it up and found, there are studies where they have had patients come in and do different things and then do it in their imagination. And the the brain functions the very same way.
Mm-hmm.
You're doing it or just imagining it.
And so something that's sinful, so to speak, that's unloving, that would damage you when you do it, if you're only thinking about it, the damage to yourself happens, even if the damage to somebody else doesn't.
Right. So take that thought to pornography.
Mm-hmm.
If you're busy involved with pornography to the point that you're not there for your spouse, you're doing damage to more than yourself. You're also damaging your partner.
Right.
You're no longer there for your partner.
And here, that's the thing that a lot of people don't get. And they'll, a woman will be tied up with a man who gets into pornography, and so she'll leave him. You couldn't do that. He didn't cheat on you. Well, in his mind, the damage was just the same as if he had. And they don't get that. So then they rag on the woman for leaving her husband for unfaithfulness, when all it was in their minds, it was just pornography. You can't leave him over that. You only leave him if he actually is physically unfaithful to you.
But that is physically unfaithfulness.
Yeah. Well, you got to understand how they think. They don't think it is, but yeah.
Not part of your body.
Yeah. Now, another note we might make about this. This is something I heard many years ago, but I think it might be valuable for you to consider. The Ten Commandments are written mostly in the negative. Don't do this, don't do that, don't do the other thing. In the King James, what?
Thou shalt not.
Yeah, that's the King James wording. Thou shalt not. I think the NIV wording is you shall not. Let me get there in the NIV. I didn't have it open to that. Had it somewhere else for our sermon presentation. You shall not. You shall not. Yes, you shall not is the terminology the NIV uses. The New American Standard Bible uses. Let me see. You shall not. It uses essentially the same language. And I'll have a comment to make about that in a moment. But the thing is that most of these, the fifth and the fourth, are the exceptions, are in the negative. Don't do this, don't do that. What's the song? Do this, don't do that. Can't you read the sign? But there's a reason for that. And that is, this is just an expression of God's law. Now, there are people who will tell you that the Ten Commandments are God's law. No, they're an expression of it. God's law is His character. And as we keep saying in this group, God is good. His character is good. It is pure. It is kind, compassionate. All of these things. And that is His law. Now, God comes to a group of people fresh out of slavery at the very lowest levels of moral development, and we might need to talk about that sometime and get up an article about Lawrence Kohlberg and the levels of moral development. But these people are at that very low level, and God has to reach out to them where they are. And
You notice that when he wrote the Ten Commandments, he did not write a commandment, thou shalt not forget to breathe.
yeah, which reminds me of that YouTube video title. A man tries to kick his oxygen addiction by playing in traffic. I thought that was kind of a cute turn of phrase. Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but he's now trying to take the expansive concept of his character and his love and express it to a group of people who have no clue what love is. They've lived the exact opposite of love all their lives and all of their ancestors' lives for, if we can believe the chronology, about 400 years.
I don't think Abraham or his grandsons knew anything about love.
Well, no, they certainly didn't act like it very much.
I mean, look what Abraham did to Sarah, and then claimed that she was his sister.
Yeah.
And got her put in great danger.
Well,
and his son did the same thing to his wife.
Even after God has begun the work in us of transforming our characters and making us so that we love by nature, we will do things that are not loving because we're not fully healed yet. That's just the nature of things. But right now, God is dealing with a group of people who are way, way shy of knowing anything about love. He's got to try to express that to them now. And he's doing it in the form of rules. And again, I'm going to suggest, I think that part of the reason for this is that God wanted to make a demonstration to the universe, to all the unfallen worlds out there, about what wouldn't work in rescuing and redeeming the human race. But to make it accessible to them, he can't express love in the positive. It would totally overwhelm them, be way beyond what they were able to understand. So he takes 10 points and tells them, this is what love isn't. Love doesn't do these things. You've got a long road to travel. Let's get you started on that road by pointing out 10 key things that love does not do. And for that reason, then, these 10 commandments are written in the negative. Now, we read verse 2. Verse 3 probably shouldn't be broken off from verse 2 because I think it logically belongs with verse 2. I am Yahweh, your Elohim, who rescued you from the land of Egypt, the place of your slavery. You must not have any other God but me. Is God jealous? Is he controlling?
Well, it says, I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that in a moment.
What's going to happen to you if you follow a false God?
Well, I think that is exactly the point. God's going to try to build a wall around these people to protect them from the enemy. And the enemy has lots of tricks, particularly in that day when people were so caught up with mysticism, to make people think, hey, this is a great and wonderful thing, you should follow this. So God has to make it clear to them, It is not safe for you to worship any god but me. You worship any other god, you'll fill that god's head up with overinflated ideas of his or her importance. I am the only one whose character is pure enough that I will not be made selfish if you worship me. So you must not have any other god but me. No other god operates on the basis of love. No other god will respect your liberty. No other god will give you the freedom and the support to grow into what I initially designed you to be. And that then is the first commandment. The God who set us free is the God we must worship. If we come across a God that wants to restrict our liberty, that wants to put requirements on us and tie us down and bind us up, we must reject that as a God. We must not have any other God but the one who rescued us and set us free.
When you look at it as if it's a promise instead of a command, it's a case of when you follow me, this is how you will be. You won't do this.
Mm-hmm.
And he wants to bring us to the point where we won't, like the Israelites of old, they didn't need a commandment to tell them, don't forget to breathe.
Right.
But they did need a commandment to tell them, don't rob your neighbor, don't tell a lie.
Right.
And when we live within the boundary of what he created, and we have our characters transformed, living within those promises will be just as natural as breathing.
Now the second commandment, verses 4 through 6. It's one of the two lengthier commandments. You must not make for yourself an idol of any kind or an image of anything in the heavens or on the earth or in the sea. You must not bow down to them or worship them, for I, Yahweh your Elohim, am a jealous God who will not tolerate your affection for any other gods. Wow, that's worded pretty harshly, isn't it? Yeah, they've really interpreted that. I lay the sins of the parents upon their children. The entire family is affected, even children in the third and fourth generations of those who reject me. But I lavish unfailing love for 1,000 generations on those who love me and obey my commands.
It's not God punishing the children for the third and fourth generation for what their forefathers did. It's a case of the abuse being handed down because it's what you've learned.
Exactly. If you grow up in an abusive environment, you will develop unhealthy, ineffective coping skills, and you will cling to them because they're the things that made the pain stop when you were a child. And that will put you in a poor condition for dealing with the world once you're an adult. And we've talked about this before. There are those who interpret this that the third and fourth generation is not saying, I'm going to make sure that for 3 or even 4 generations, you're going to suffer for what your parents, grandparents, great grandparents did, but rather, at some point, by some mechanism we don't understand, God has put a limitation in there, and the cycle of abuse and increasing malformation and maladjustment to society breaks down after 3 or 4 generations. It isn't passed on any longer. But if you live as you should, then you pass good things on to your children, who can then pass their good things on to their children. And notice it says 1,000 generations. How long is 1,000 generations? Well, how long is a generation?
Isn't it about 20 years?
20, 25 years. So if that's the case, 1,000 generations is 20 or 25,000 years. How long has it been since these commandments were issued?
Not that long.
Most historians would put that at about 5,000 years on the outside, maybe 4. No, so 1,000 generations hasn't gone by yet. Now there's a footnote there after the word those, and for thousands of those is what the Hebrew says. Okay. I want to read that out of the NIV. Just
Keep in mind, and so when you see somebody who's acting in ways that are completely and totally detestable, you still need to love the person, and you still need to pray for that person. And bear in mind, something happened to them that you don't know about
yeah.
that would cause them to act in that way. Only God knows what happened to them.
Here's that same passage out of the NIV. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the fathers to the 3rd and 4th generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations of those who love me and keep my commandments. That is a little bit more literal and makes less of a big deal about God being jealous, and he won't let us worship anybody else because he's jealous and he's insecure, and it messes with his mind if you don't worship him. It isn't what it does to him. That's not what he's worried about. He's God. He can take it. He's worried about what it does to us.
It's not a case of God hating sinners.
Right.
It's a case of God hating sin, because what sin does to his creation.
Exactly.
What he loves, it kills them.
A good doctor hates the diseases because he sees what the diseases are doing to his patients. And he may come to hate some of the practices that the patients engage in, that he sees undo the things he's trying to do for them to improve their health. But if he's a good doctor, he doesn't hate the patient.
Every one of his patients were dying, so he started looking for a way to try to save them.
Yeah.
You gotta go listen to him. Jason Fung, F-U-N-G. Like in fungus.
Yeah.
Fung.
Yeah,
F-U-N-G.
verse 7. This one, for us, will have added meaning when I remind you of something. You must not misuse the name of the Lord your God. The Lord will not let you go unpunished if you misuse his name. The NIV uses the term misuse. The New American Standard Bible uses the term more like the way the King James puts it, which is not take the name of the Lord your God in vain.
Oh, I could write so many paragraphs on that, pages and pages on that.
All right, explain what you're thinking.
Huh?
Explain what you're thinking.
What is God's name?
It is
It's
his.
a character, isn't it?
It is his character, exactly.
And how many people are out there abusing others in the name of the Lord?
And in that case, very clearly, they are taking that name, that character, in vain because they misrepresent it to the people. They misuse it. They lie about it to other people.
Of a pastor in the meeting. He was screaming, I don't know what he was yelling at, but he was screaming at this woman that was sitting there on the floor, and her husband was standing there with him. And the pastor just hauled off and slapped her in the face. And she had to just sit there and take it.
No.
That is not Christ-like behavior. That is not God's character. That is not love. And that shows such a... Well, all right, Kim Davis was taught by the church that if she supported homosexuality in any way, she would burn in hell. And then when she was put in a position that she was told to issue marriage license for same-sex couples or she would be put in jail, she chose to go to jail. Now, what does that say about the church? But what does that say? What kind of message does that say about God?
Mm-hmm.
It gives such a bad message about God.
And then those same people will sit there and raise a big hue and cry about the cause of all the atheists in the world today. Well, they're probably a big part of it themselves. Don't point the finger elsewhere. Is you got three others pointing back at yourself, where the real blame lies. Did I throw you off your soapbox?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah, I get upset when I get started on that.
Now, I'd like to address the second sentence in that verse. The Lord will not let you go unpunished if you misuse his name. Well, that is inherent in the very act. If you misunderstand, misrepresent the character of God, you're not living by that character, that is sin, and that damages and ultimately kills you. And God will not stand between you and the natural consequences of your choices and actions. So if you misuse his name, if you misapply his character, if you lie about it to yourself and to others, the result is inevitable and God will not prevent it. He'll let it happen. As hard as it is for him to do that because he loves you. Reading on, verse 8. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work. But the seventh day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. On that day, no one in your household may do any work. This includes you, your sons and daughters, your male and female servants, your livestock, and any foreigners living among you. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them. But on the seventh day he rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and set it apart as holy.
But if you get a Sabbath voucher, you can overlook that one.
Yeah. Whenever
Put my tongue in my cheek.
whenever humans start trying to enforce God's law amongst themselves, they have to put in exceptions because otherwise it gets ridiculous. And the exceptions themselves are ridiculous. Everybody should worship and follow God as the Spirit directs them. And the Spirit may direct one person one way and another person another way. We have to be big enough in ourselves and grown up and adult enough in ourselves to let that happen. Now, let me put a twist on this that you may not have thought of before. I think of this commandment as kind of an ultimate workers' rights legislation. Think about the things that employers do to their employees in this modern day and age to improve their profit margins. 7 days on, 4 days off. Weird schedules like that. We'll give you the day off, but we're going to cycle the days off so that somebody's always here to take care of things. Now, listen to what this rule did for work in the nation of Israel. You could not work anybody longer than 6 days in a row. They had to have at least 1 day off out of every 7. No jumping around the schedule. It was the same day off every week. 6 days on, 1 day off. 6 days on, 1 day off. Furthermore, to make it possible for workers to enjoy their families and for workers to enjoy fellowship with one another, all the workers had to get the same day, a full 24-hour period, off every week. No playing games with this workers' rights legislation. No screwball schedules. No do this, do that to try and get around the regulations. Everybody got a day off. It had to be regular and every week, and it had to be the same for everybody. And notice,
You have the right to enforce that on somebody who doesn't believe. Somebody who doesn't have the same conviction.
well, turn that around. What right does the employer have to enforce his ideas on you when you don't believe in them?
Well, didn't we have that happen with Hobby Lobby, who didn't want to pay for birth control?
Oh, well, yeah, but
Got a religious conviction.
yeah.
He didn't believe in using birth control, therefore he did not want to enable his employees.
Yeah, it had to do with the health insurance.
Oh. Yet I don't think he would be willing to support their children that he created
Yeah, well,
by not supporting them. Got me on another soapbox there, Beard.
yeah, I noticed.
No, I was thinking of I think the guy was Sanballat. That's probably the wrong name.
Well, there were Sanballat and Tobiah, and I remember the names, I'm not able to place them immediately.
Um, they were rebuilding the city, and
All right.
that was all wrong. On Sabbath, the merchants would come. The gates of the city would be closed. The merchants would show up and camp outside the city, and the guy would go out and threaten them, and then he started beating on them or something. I don't remember.
You're recalling the story of Nehemiah.
Okay, yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, we did a sermon presentation about him a year or so ago, and about how what he did set Israel up for failure.
Oh Lord, look at all I've done and remember me, please.
Yeah.
Do you really want the Lord to remember this?
Verse 12. This is the other one that's positive. Verse 8, the fourth commandment, that's positive. Verse 12, the fifth commandment, that's also positive. Honor your father and mother. Then you will live a long, full life in the land the Lord your God is giving you. That's pretty simple. Pretty straightforward. And it's pretty limited. Now, I know that when I was a kid, parents would teach this commandment to their children. That means you have to obey us. Well, it's a good thing for children to obey their parents, because normally the parents are older and wiser and can keep their kids from doing really stupid things by having their children obey them. But parents need to be careful not to overburden their children and make obedience a chore and a curse rather than a privilege and a blessing. But it doesn't say obey, it says honor.
And honor is not the same thing as respect.
No. Respect is earned. Honor is just due based on position. Does that sound what you were thinking?
It's difficult for me. This particular commandment is difficult for me. I struggle with that one. And all I will say is I suffer from complex PTSD stemming back from early childhood years.
Mm-hmm. And yet you were willing to have your father live in your house for the last year or so of his life because
No,
he couldn't
he
afford
couldn't
his
have
own
been
house.
here.
Huh?
Would be detrimental to my health.
Yeah.
I refuse to allow him to be homeless
Right.
when we had room for him.
Yeah. Now, the next three are very straightforward and very short, and they do seem to be, in from our line of human thinking, they do seem to be in descending order of seriousness. In our human judicial systems, we consider some crimes to be more serious than others. And so some crimes, the sentence is 30 to 90 days in jail. Other crimes are, 30 years to life in prison.
Don't by any means put your celery stalks next to your tomatoes.
Yeah, that gets you the death penalty in certain places. So here they are in the order that they're written. You must not murder. You must not commit adultery. You must not steal.
If you put your celery stalks next to tomatoes, you will cause somebody to break that murder commandment.
Yeah. Generally, we understand that murder is an exceptionally serious crime because it takes something that cannot be given back. The last one, you must not steal. If you steal somebody's car, you can give it back to them. If you steal somebody's car and total it, you can buy another one and give it back to him. If you murder somebody, you take their life, nobody can give that back. One of the judges that I watch from time to time had a sentencing case this week that was emotionally difficult for him. The case was that somebody had been driving, he'd worked all day, he was exhausted, he was a little bit distracted, and there was an incident on the highway, and he hit somebody else's car, and the somebody else died. And it was interesting because the deceased man's girlfriend at the time made a victim impact statement. Both the mother and the father made victim impact statements. And the mother actually said very specifically that she wasn't going to hold it against him. She had forgiven him, and she was going to leave his punishment up to the court. And one of the things this judge said as he was discussing, because judges usually will put on the record a fairly lengthy account of why they're going to make the decision that they just made. And he actually issued jail time in the case, and he told the defendant very specifically, I wish I could help these parents more. I wish I could give them their son back. That's what I'd like to do, but I can't do that. And that's why we have very limited capabilities for justice in our human society. Because if the case is murder, we can't fix it. If it's theft, you can do restitution. You can sort of fix it. You do other things, there are things you can do to make it better, to sort of fix it.
If you abuse a child, you cannot give them back their innocence.
No, you can't. And maybe, at least in our own thinking, we need to understand the severity of various offenses and crimes and torts on the basis of what can be fixed, what can't be fixed. And, even something as simple as stealing somebody's car, that's still emotional stress on the person whose car was stolen. And that you can't fix. Yeah, you can fix their car, you can give it back to them, you can restore it, make sure it goes many miles after you give it to them as it would have before you took it, that kind of thing. But you can't fix the other damage that you did. So, and it used to be, even in society, considered adultery a pretty serious crime. Nowadays, usually, unless it's forcible adultery, we call it rape, you won't get in trouble for it, except that adultery can cost you in a divorce settlement. You must not steal. And then, verse 16, you must not testify falsely against your neighbor. Now, a lot of times this gets presented as the tell the truth commandment. And certainly testifying falsely is a form of lie, and probably ultimately we understand that lying, that's how this whole thing got started. The deceiver lied about the character of God. And when people believed his lies, bad things happened. But the very specific meaning of this, do not testify falsely. Now, you listen to these court videos, and every day you're going to have people go to court and break this commandment. And some of them are, they believe, living up to the vow they made in court to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Although I know some judges now who, and I kind of respect this, they say, tell the truth and nothing but the truth and leave out the whole truth. Because anybody who's familiar with our system of justice in the United States, and it probably is like this in other countries as well, before a trial starts, the lawyers will get together and they will decide what truth can be told and what truth cannot be told in court. And if you start to say those things, the lawyers and the judge will shut you up and make you violate your oath to tell the whole truth. So there are judges, I think, who have recognized that little idiocy in our thing, and so they make people swear to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, and don't keep that in about the whole truth, because they know that there are truths they don't want in court and will be withheld. So don't put the witness in a bind and make them swear to tell the whole truth and then refuse to let them tell the whole truth. That's my little hobby horse for the night.
Well, I just watched that Karen Reed trial, and what amazed me was back earlier under the grand jury query, the testimony said one thing. What was her name? Was it Jen McCabe? Was that her name?
Yeah, I think so.
Testified that when she saw Karen Reed, Karen said, "Did I kill him? Did I kill him?" And then when it got to trial, she sat there on the witness stand and said that Karen said 3 times, "I killed him, I killed him, I killed him." And that's what the jurors heard.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't hear the other. That Karen had said, "Did I kill him?"
And apparently some of the jurors were not able to see, were not trained enough to detect the signs that when she did that, she was lying. There are experts who could tell. In fact, there was one expert who was actually listening to the testimony, a recording of the testimony, and pointing at all the signs that somebody was lying and say, well, when he said that, he was lying. When he said that, he was telling the truth. And from that was able to get a clue about what had really happened. But he got out of that later. He said he probably shouldn't have done that, because all he was really wanting to do was pointing out when they were and when they weren't lying. So there are people who can tell. Unfortunately,
He knew who was the murderer and how his testimony had revealed that he was the murderer.
yeah.
And he told us who it was.
Yeah, and that's the part that he wished he hadn't done later.
Yeah.
Well, let's go on here, because we've been dealing around about testifying falsely here. Yeah, ideally, this would say, don't, have personal integrity. Don't be afraid of the truth. You live your life in accordance with reality, because that's really what That's really what honesty is all about. It is being true to reality as opposed to ideology. And if you do that, then you're living honestly. You're living with integrity. Then the final commandment. This is the one that makes the strict interpretation of everything else a little shaky, because it says, you must not covet your neighbor's house. You must not covet your neighbor's wife, male or female servant, ox or donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor.
So
Now
you get around that one by saying, "Oh, I don't want yours. I want one just like it."
Yeah. And I'm looking at the different versions here. It is very interesting. All of them put as a separate phrase or sentence, do not covet your neighbor's house. And then as an additional servant, do not covet all these other things either. When the ancient church turned the Ten Commandments into a memorizable item, they divided them up a little bit differently. Now, the accusation is that they left out that second commandment because that church was big on icons and images and so forth, and it could be interpreted that what they were doing violated that second commandment. They left it out, and then they got down here, so you get down, the Sabbath commandment is number 3, the parents' commandment is number 4, 5 is murder, 6 is adultery, 7 is steal, 8 is testify falsely against your neighbor. Well, then they divide up verse 17 to make it 2 commandments. But they didn't separate out the way it's written here. They didn't separate out, you must not covet your neighbor's house, number 9, and then number 10, you must not covet your neighbor's wife, male or female, servant, ox. No, how'd they do it? Number 9 is, do not covet your neighbor's wife, and then number 10 is, do not covet blah, 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 blah. And we could go on and on about that, about how the ancient church viewed certain things and why they would have separated that part out, outside of the actual structure of the original language and what's being written here. Verse 18, when the people heard the thunder and the loud blast of the ram's horn, and when they saw the flashes of lightning and the smoke billowing from the mountain, they stood at a distance, trembling with fear. And they said to Moses, remember this will be important later, you speak to us, and we will listen. But don't let God speak directly to us, or we will die. Now, all this shock and awe that was going on that mountain, what has been its effect? It's made the people fear. They're trembling with fear. They're afraid that if God speaks directly to them, they will die. Well, we've already pointed out that God, by his very nature, is toxic to sin, and therefore to anyone who is bound up in sin, as is the human race. So that part of it is true. And Moses says something here that, at least the way it's rendered here, doesn't seem to make sense. He starts out and says, don't be afraid. Well, he should be saying things like, don't be afraid, God's not out to get you. He just wants you to understand that you cannot approach him directly. But here's what he says. Moses answered them, for God has come in this way to test you, and so that your fear of him will keep you from sinning. Now, that may be an interpretation. Let's look in other versions here to see how that's put. Verse 20, Moses said, this is the NIV, Moses said to the people, Do not be afraid. God has come to test you, so that the fear of God will be with you to keep you from sinning. Well, that's not all that different. I want to see the New American Standard Bible here, see what it says there.
Maybe we need an understanding of the word fear.
Yeah. And Moses said to the people, do not be afraid, for God has come in order to test you, and in order that the fear of him may remain with you, so that you may not sin. Well, if we understand fear not as the fright and the high adrenaline and everything that the people were experiencing, as all this lightning and loud noise and smoke and all this is going on, if we understand that as understanding God and understanding his goodness, that is, in fact, what would keep us from sinning. As the people stood in the distance, Moses approached the dark cloud where God was. And the Lord said to Moses, say this to the people of Israel. You saw for yourselves that I spoke to you from heaven. Remember, you must not make any idols of silver or gold to rival me. Build for me an altar made of earth, and offer your sacrifices to me, your burnt offerings and peace offerings, your sheep and goats, and your cattle. Build my altar wherever I cause my name to be remembered, and I will come to you and bless you. If you use stones to build my altar, use only natural uncut stones. Do not shape the stones with a tool, for that would make the altar unfit for holy use. And do not approach my altar by going up steps. If you do, someone might look up under your clothing and see your nakedness. That last bit I want to see in another version. Just see how it gets put. If you make an altar of stones for me, do not build it with dressed stones, for you will defile it if you use a tool on it. And do not go up to my altar on steps, lest your nakedness be exposed on it. And in fact, when the priests were given garments, they were given linen undergarments, specifically designed to keep them covered, even from underneath the robes that would have been common for them to wear at the time. And this is fascinating, because if you look at the worship structures of Egypt and the worship structures even in the New World, in the Americas, they often built very tall structures. Well, in order to get to the top of the structures, you would have to build steps to get up there. And God is telling them here, no, don't do that. You don't need to get up higher to get close to me. The difference between 0 feet off the ground and 50 feet off the ground, compared to the distance between Earth and my planet, which we call heaven, is so insignificant that it makes no difference whatsoever. Don't bother. I don't want physical closeness. I want a bond with you in relationship. That's how you get close. You go to certain places in Europe and you'll find towns filled with very tall spires and towers. And these things were structures for worship. The Leaning Tower of Pisa was a tower built to be part of a worship structure. The people, even then, seemed to think, if I can just get higher up in the sky, I can be closer to God. and it became, a status symbol. If your taller was taller than everybody else's, then you were closer to God. That made you more important. And so the rich families would be competing with each other to build a taller tower than the other one. And then their towers would get so tall they weren't built structurally sound and they'd fall. Well, all that nonsense going on. But God said here, don't bother. You don't need to. And how much time have we spent? Quite a bit. Let's move on to chapter 21. We probably won't get clear through it. What are you saying?
I don't know.
I just got a notice here about Avast. Avast recently reached settlement with the Federal Trade Commission. Click below to learn more. And that's come up on 2 computers of mine that don't have Avast on them. Has it come up on yours?
I'm still ticked over the thing that came in my email. Don't ask me that.
Okay, yeah.
I got put into a class action lawsuit against my will. I don't have the option to opt out of it. And if the party loses, I don't gain anything from it. I'm ticked off.
Yeah, and it's just based on something that a doctor assigned to you. You didn't really get a choice in which one you were going to use. They just said, here, use this one.
Yeah.
And it turned out to be subject to a recall later.
Yeah. And I only used it for a week. Maybe 2.
Well, while you were waiting for the recall, you used it for years. Took you the longest time to get your replacement in.
Yeah, it did, didn't it?
Yeah. Well, anyway. Chapter 21. These are the regulations you must present to Israel. Now, this is supposedly all on the same day. Those 10 commandments have been spelled out. Now Moses has gone up on the mountain. God's giving him some additional instructions. If you buy a Hebrew slave, he may serve for no more than 6 years. Set him free in the 7th year, and he will owe you nothing for his freedom. If he was single when he became your slave, he shall leave single. But if he was married before he became a slave, then his wife must be freed with him. Now comes the interesting part. If his master gave him a wife while he was a slave, and they had sons or daughters, then only the man will be free in the 7th year, but his wife and children will still belong to his master. But the slave may declare, I love my master, my wife, and my children. I don't want to go free. If he does this, his master must present him before God. Footnote A there, before the judges. All right, well, yeah. Makes sense. Then his master must take him to the door or doorpost and publicly pierce his ear with an awl. After that, the slave will serve his master for life. When a man sells his daughter as a slave, she will not be freed at the end of 6 years as the men are. Does this sound misogynist?
I'm sorry, I wasn't listening.
Well,
Still recall.
this is the rules about slaves. If a man is married and then becomes a slave, his wife must be freed with him. But if he marries while he's a slave, if his master gives him a wife, then when is in the 7th year when he gets free, the wife does not.
Then
And if he
she's
wants
not
to keep his wife, he has to dedicate himself to his master for life. Then it says, verse 7, when a man sells his daughter as a slave, she will not be freed at the end of 6 years, as the men are. If she does not satisfy her owner, he must allow her to be bought back again. But he is not allowed to sell her to foreigners, since he is the one who broke the contract with her. But if the slave's owner arranges for her to marry his son, he may no longer treat her as a slave, but as a daughter.
I have to wonder if that's the case of God issuing that command or Moses issuing that command and claiming it was from God.
Well, yeah, we probably won't know that for sure, but certainly, even if God issued it, it is a case of nudging them in the right direction. We don't believe that God is sexist. He considers women and men of equal value. And the New Testament says that pretty specifically. In Christ there is neither slave nor free, male nor female, Jew nor Greek. We're all one in Christ Jesus. So this sounds out of character for God to say that if a man becomes a slave, it's only for 6 years. If a woman becomes a slave, she doesn't get free in the 7th year like the men do. If a man who has married a slave wife takes another wife for himself, he must not neglect the rights of the first wife to food, clothing, and sexual intimacy. If he fails in any of these 3 obligations, she may leave as a free woman without making any payment. So there are some definite protections here. But some of these rules, and we're gonna notice this again and again as we start reading through all the rules in the Old Testament. Some of these rules don't make any sense at all unless polygamy is allowed. And this is one of those cases. If a man who has married a slave wife takes another wife for himself, he must not neglect the rights of the first wife to food, clothing, and sexual intimacy. Well, if it were very strictly a case of one man, one woman, as some people try to make it, then this rule makes no sense at all. If he's got a slave wife, that's his wife. She's the only one. He can't take another one. But this specifically says when he does take another one, here are the rules and regulations for it. And there are other rules when we get later into it. It says, well, you can't have this and this as a wife at the same time. Well, if you can only have one wife, having these 2 as a wife at the same time, there's no need for that restriction because you can't have 2 wives anyway. And
I would not want to have a rival.
no. I think it's a case of, as God predicted there in Genesis chapter 3. Once the human race fell into sin, once there was selfishness involved, once evolution and the power of strength and might began to rule, then it wasn't long before men had the upper hand in all things socially and domestically. And by the time, many years later, the Israelites come out of Egypt, misogyny is the rule of the day. Sexism is how life happens. It's just what everybody expects because that's the way the world is, kind of a thing.
Well, it was like that before they went into slavery. Sarah referred to Abraham as her Lord.
Yeah.
Sarah wanted a child. She told Abraham, go have sex with my maidservant.
Yeah.
Like that child.
My slave. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we've reached the end of the section here that deals with slaves, and we might talk more about this bit about the doorpost and the piercing the ear with an awl, and the slave for life thing. But for tonight, with our time having essentially run out, I think we'll stop here in the middle of chapter 21, and we will continue with this next week. So we thank you for joining us. We hope that what we have discussed has strengthened your relationship with your Creator, firmed up your commitment to live in accordance with reality, and has been in some way a blessing to you. So, we say now that until next week, we say goodbye and God bless.